Thank you so much for joining this session. Um, I am so impressed that so many of you took the time out of your really busy schedules. I know this is a really busy part of the year, but Ian, Annie, and I are just so thrilled to be part of this event and to share some of the fantastic work from across the university. So today you're joining the pandemic problem solving session where we're going to be showcasing tech solutions to teaching challenges. I'm Gabe Abrams. I work at the school, at the extension school, and Annie, Ian, and I are going to introduce ourselves as we go. This session is going to be divided into two different halves. The first half is going to be lightning rounds, where we're going to showcase some of the solutions that people have brought forth in these interesting, exciting, and challenging times. And then the second half of this session is going to be topic breakouts, where we'll divide up into groups and discuss the different topics that we went through, sharing ideas, sharing experiences, challenges, and some of your own solutions to these same challenges that we're talking about. So what inspired this session? I think we're all used to hearing that the pandemic has kind of flipped everything on its head. I know that in the beginning of the pandemic, I personally felt like we were in crisis mode, constantly just trying to get things running, just trying to get classes online. And I was really excited to move toward fall and to start to think about how to improve the classes, how to make assignments work in the online space, and how to start working on all of the other challenges that we're facing beyond the crisis mode. And so with the pandemic, we saw entirely new challenges. And then we also saw some kind of like age-old challenges that we've been facing for a long time, but that were exacerbated by the pandemic. So we thought we'd bring together 4 different types of challenges that we've seen a lot of people facing throughout the pandemic. And those 4 challenges are building community in the classroom, creating collaborative spaces for students, moving those custom assignments, those different types of assignments into the online space, and then restructuring exams to make them work in the remote world. And then after we go through that lightning round of sharing those different solutions to those problems, we're going to be going into those breakout groups. So here's a little bit of what to expect from those breakout groups. Make sure that you take notes, think of ideas, bring those ideas, those questions, those challenges that you're facing or that you have, bring those to those topic groups, and we'll have some space to connect with all of our colleagues here and to share some of our own successes, some of our own challenges, and think of ways that these solutions and these challenges apply to your own work or your own classroom. And then finally, after our topic breakouts, we're going to spend some time, just a little bit of time, to come back together as a group for a little bit of wrap up. Before we continue, I wanted to point your attention to the bottom of the slides where it says slides and resources. We have a link. That link is bit.ly/pandemic-problem-solving. That is a link that'll take you to a Google Drive folder where you'll be able to find the current slides that we're running right now and some resources and the Google Docs that we'll be using later. So without further ado, I'd love to hand it off to Ian Tosh, who's going to be starting off the beginning of the lightning round.
Thanks, Gabe. So the first thing that we're going to, I should introduce myself. I'm Ian Tosh, the Assistant Director of Educational Technology at the Harvard Kennedy School. I've been in this role for about 4 years and at Harvard for about 6 or 7 years. I'm going to start off by talking about building community in the classroom. We have all experienced this being a challenge, not only in the classroom, but in any of our work. When interacting with people only through this tiny little screen, it's tough to build community and real relationship with them. That's exacerbated in the classroom because students will have been put together perhaps for the first time into these groups and have to generate those relationships from scratch. And so that's been a particular challenge that we've had, and people have addressed that in in a variety of ways. And so we'll take a look at some of those. I want to highlight that you will actually get to experience some of these. This is one that you're able to do in one session. And so a couple of the things you'll see you have experienced already, and some of them you'll experience a little bit later in the class, in the session that we'll run today. So the first, creating a music playlist and playing it in the beginning of the session. This has been something you've experienced already as we listened to some music as you came in. You may do, we have had faculty do a number of different versions of this. Maybe it's the teaching team's favorites. Perhaps it's songs or an artist that pertains to a particular topic that you're covering. The education can actually start at that time before class begins. You might have students contribute to a shared playlist where they can get to see some of the work that some of their preferences for music that may or may not relate to the classes. Just a good way to get to know each other and cause some of that conversation that might drift in and out of class. On the technical side of how to do this, you can do two things. If you're sharing slides, which is what we're doing right now, click the share sound button in the lower left-hand corner there as sharing slides. Now, if you aren't sharing slides and you want people to be able to see each other in the gallery view, you can use the advanced tab and the share computer audio only selection for sharing only audio and not your slides. That can be another way to keep the visual relationship happening while you're listening to audio. The next thing we'll talk about is breakout groups. This is something that in a classroom during the middle of a class session is very easy to do. You know, break out and talk to your neighbor about a given topic, come back and report to the class. Can be easy to do in person and a little bit more complicated to do on Zoom. However, still very possible. You might use these breakout groups to do some pairing of work, or to do a little bit more intense work. You might have them break into project groups, or even if you're doing only community building and relationship generation, you might do this around common interests, or generate groups randomly and invite students to get to know somebody they haven't known before. This is there's a new ability to do in Zoom, a way for students to choose their own breakout groups. And that's available to you in the breakout group section. Instead of just the first two selections, you'll see a third one. This is one of the places where it's important to keep your Zoom app up to date. Either you, as you're leading it, you need to get this option. And as students are participating in these breakout groups, they'll need to have an up-to-date Zoom app in order to choose their own groups. Now, if you don't know if your Zoom app is up to date, this is the other thing that we will get to experience towards the end of the session. When we break into our breakout groups, we are going to do this. We're going to make you select your own groups. We're not going to put you where you want to be. You'll select one of these 4 topic areas and join that group. And some of you will find out that your Zoom is not up to date, and we'll deal with that when we get to it. We'll still be able to get you into a breakout group where you can dive into some of these topics. I also want to present another place you might form community, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And we're going to bring in a faculty voice of Teddy Sfornos and talk about how he's used Slack in one of his courses.
Slack is an app that I used with my teaching team in previous years to help coordinate problem sets and meetings and things like that. But I decided to create one for the entire course. So perhaps the most used and obvious use of the channel of the workspace rather was the Ask for Help channel, where students could ask questions about problem set questions or logistical things about office hours, things along those lines. And the teaching team and I would sort of monitor that and answer questions, but students would also answer one another's questions quite a bit. And then I could go and sort of endorse a particular answer. Another really important channel was the articles channel, where students could share articles, tweets, things along those lines that they encountered in the world that was relevant to the content of the class. And this ended up being a really great way for students to talk about their own work outside of class and things that they were encountering. The third and maybe most controversial use of it that I did was this in-class channel. So I wanted to both keep the Zoom chat relatively focused on course content, but I also wanted to make the ability for students who were used to conversing during class, who were used to talking to one another, to create a space for them to be able to do that as well without distracting others who didn't want to be doing that. So I created this in-class channel just for folks who wanted to sort of have side conversations or ask the teaching team questions during class, so that the actual Zoom chat could be reserved for course-specific things in which I would ask them to give me examples of stuff and things along those lines. Finally, we had a teaching team channel that was a private channel just for me, my CAs, and the NTF. And this ended up being a really useful channel during class because they could message me. This was the only channel that I would get notified of during class. And they could message me hey, your video is not working or your screen sharing is off or things along those lines that would be really useful for me as I was actually teaching. Even just saying this person hasn't been called on in a little while was incredibly helpful, and the kind of feedback I just couldn't get without such a quick messaging platform like this. So in the end, I think this was a really important and useful tool, and one that I'm definitely going to be using in my residential classes. And the reasons were it was low friction, which is to say students already use Slack in their personal lives and things like that. So they knew what this was, and it was very easy for them to type a quick message and send it off without worrying about it being kind of a formal request. It allowed for very low stakes interactions. On Slack, you could even just respond with an emoji, and that allowed people to sort of signal that they were there or respond to something without having to type a long response to kind of indicate enjoyment or appreciation. And then finally, even the teaching team and I could answer questions, but more importantly, we could sort of signal that we were present in a very kind of ubiquitous way that I don't know how I would have been able to get otherwise. So the fact that students knew that I was accessible when they needed me, and that I could indicate that I was around simply by responding with emojis sometimes or typing a quick note, ended up being a really important part in creating sort of glue that we could then use to interact with one another throughout the semester. So I think it was a great innovation and one that I definitely plan on using in my residential classes when we return.
So I think you'll get the sense from listening to Teddy that it is not the tool itself that really dictates how valuable this may be for your class experience, but the creativity with which you come to the use of the tool. So unfortunately, as a technician, I would love to say the tool is going to fix everything for you. The tool that you use becomes a mechanism by which you can get your ideas into the classroom and really facilitate what your students need in a really specific way. I did just want to mention that Slack is now available as a plugin into Canvas so that it just appears in the left-hand navigation for your students and your teaching team, makes it really easy to generate workspaces dedicated to your class, populate it with the appropriate people at the appropriate time, and give kind of that front door for students to get in to use Slack. And you can talk to your local technical administrators to be able to get access to that. We are piloting this at the Kennedy School now and have a few classes running with it, and it has proven to be a pretty successful tool. Speaking of successful tools, I'm going to turn it over to Gabe now to talk a little bit about the collaborative spaces that we can generate for students.
Thanks. So before I dive in, I'll actually introduce myself. I'm Gabe Abrams. I work on two teams at DCE, the Extension School. That first team is teaching and learning, where I get to work with a whole bunch of awesome people who work to identify challenges that our classes are facing. And then I also spend half my time working on the software development team at DCE, where we build tools to hopefully address some of those challenges. And it's just very rewarding and been quite an exciting time. So some ways to create those collaborative spaces for students. We have a few different examples, and some of them I think you might be familiar with. So starting off with discussion tools, those discussion boards that we're also familiar with. These are spaces where people have a chance to contribute text, create their own topics, maybe upload videos or images, comment on each other's posts. And I've seen a lot of really exciting ways that people have used these discussion boards in creative ways. So a few examples of those. One creative way of using a discussion tool is to create a space that's just for student-driven discussion. So leave that open for students to come up with their own topics, bring in their own ideas, and create their own original posts. So in comparison to maybe giving them a prompt or giving them a topic, maybe just try giving students their own space to come up with their own topics and also a chance for them to build some community there. And then another idea would be to create a find your study group board where people can post about the times of day that they work, some topics that they're interested in, maybe their time zone. And really all of that together can let people discuss and come up with common working times and project groups and things like that. So you can use this find your study group board as a way to help students come together and find their peers and find their study groups, find their project groups, which is something that I know that a lot of students struggle with when you don't have those in-person spaces, the after class, before class, office hours kind of spaces where people naturally form those groups. And then another idea for a discussion tool is to create a current events board where students can bring in whether those events are news or things in social media or something from a TV show, whatever current thing is happening, they can bring that into the discussion board and talk about how it might tie into the class, tie into this week's discussion or this week's topic, just as a way to kind of, again, build more community, connect people with each other, but also a way to have students contribute back to class and be a little more engaged. Another way that you can create collaborative spaces for students online is to give out shared documents. So the best example that I have for a shared document is a Google Doc. And this is, of course, a space where you can share text, images, videos, and comments, and you can look at each other's work and review each other's work. But the most important piece of this is it's live. So you're all working on one live living document at the same time. And that's really, really great for those activities in the classroom or live activities, because this is a great space where people can be working on the same content. So this is another example of a tool or a process that we're going to be doing today in this session. So when we move into those topic breakouts, what we're going to be doing is for each of the breakout groups, we'll have a Google Doc for each group. And that's a space where we'll be able to write down notes, share ideas, answer some questions. And it's just a fun, easy way where we can all take notes and brainstorm and come together with ideas. So this is a perfect example of something that you could do in your own classes. When you send people into breakout groups, just make sure you create a Google Doc for each group. The important thing here is to make sure that each group's Google Doc is shared publicly to the world so that you don't have any issues of students being able to get into the Google Doc, and make sure it's shared so that everyone can edit the document. Another idea for creating a collaborative space for people is to use a virtual whiteboard. So I'm going to be handing it off to Ryan Buell, who is going to be talking about how to use one of these example tools in a classroom.
Hi, my name is Ryan Buell. I'm a professor in the Technology and Operations Management Unit at Harvard Business School. And the course that I taught this last semester is Managing Service Operations, which is a 28-session case-based course. One of the challenges that I was thinking about coming into the semester is that when we teach in person, we use the boards in our classroom very, very intensively. We facilitate case-based learning. And so any insight or idea or open question, we make sure that we tally it and log it on the boards. Now, this is a challenge in the Zoom environment because so often if faculty are writing in their boards, using their boards, they only can be seen by their students when they're actually on the screen. And so I was thinking about this and trying different technologies. And it turns out that a few different boarding applications actually have this feature in them where you can send out a link to your students. And so at the beginning of class, I'd push out a link, and I'll do it here. You won't be able to see it in the video here, but the link basically says, good morning. Please follow this link to access the boards for today's discussion. And what's so important about that is that students, if I don't have my boards up like this, they can go to their web browser and they can actually see what it is that I'm doing. And better still, they can actually use their mouse so that they can move around in the boards and they can look at what's going on or what we've talked about in different parts of the discussion, which is so important because if we cut them off from that information, they don't have that key memory jogger that enables them to engage most deeply in the conversation. We started this with the first class, and this is something that my colleagues at HBS started to pick up throughout the semester. And so the app that I use is called Scribble Together. What's nice about Scribble Together is that you can run it in dark mode like this, so it looks like a blackboard. It's helpful for HBS because we use blackboards, but it's also helpful because it reduces fatigue on students' eyes if they're not looking at a glaring white background. But the fact that the version that they see on their own screens is white means that they can PDF it and they can print it if they want for their own records. And so that's one innovation that we've used that I found to be really, really helpful this semester.
So with so many different whiteboarding tools out there, Scribble Together is one. There's so many different virtual whiteboards that you can use. There's even one built into Zoom if you haven't found it. It's also under the share screen button. And so there's so many different options for virtual whiteboards that you can use. One idea for using a virtual whiteboard in your classroom to give students the collaborative space is to, in those breakout groups, to give each group a whiteboard, or for students who are doing projects together, give them a whiteboard to plan out their group project. The important thing here is that I want to note that virtual whiteboards aren't the best for accessibility. So it's important that if you're doing a virtual whiteboard, it's important to assign a note taker. Maybe do that in a shared Google Doc, and have them kind of follow along with the content in the whiteboard. Take those notes, because for those students who are just to increase accessibility for the virtual whiteboard, it's good to have a note taker as well. If you're curious about hardware, because that's a really common question, is it's really tough to draw on a virtual whiteboard with a mouse. How can I do this more fluidly? There are two ways that I recommend. One of them is to just buy a drawing tablet. I know that there are some costs associated with that, but they're getting quite cheap these days, many of them under $100. And then also a little pro tip, there are apps out there that let you use your trackpad if you have a Mac. That let you use your trackpad as a drawing tablet as long as you have some sort of stylus. So one of those tools can help you to make that virtual whiteboard a lot more accessible. And also for those students who might be drawing on virtual whiteboards, a lot of them have support for other types of ways of putting things on the whiteboard, whether that's text, uploading images, or using shapes. It's not always a requirement that you do drawings on the whiteboard. Another really cool example of a collaborative space that we use a bit in some of our classes is a virtual Post-it board. And I just find this to be a really fun way to collaborate with people, because it really does feel like a low stakes environment. Each person just kind of puts up a little tiny Post-it or a little thought or a little idea. I've seen it used in so many great ways for collaboration. This is an example of a virtual Post-it board called Padlet, and it allows you to put these little Post-its up. Anyone can put Post-its up, and there are lots of different little layouts. So you can have Post-its in columns or in groups, or you can just have it freeform like a wall where anyone can put a Post-it wherever they want. And there's also the ability to draw lines between Post-its if you want to kind of connect things together or build a web or build a tree of ideas. So some examples of how to use this. I've seen it used really well for projects and groups that are brainstorming or outlining their project. Each person, it's a good way to bring everybody into the discussion, because everyone can put their ideas onto the board. And then you can have another step where you can reorganize the Post-its, move them around, and make sure that everyone's ideas are included. And then a way that you can use the virtual Post-it board in class or in groups is to use it as a space for doing that, that initial group charter or talking about norms in the classroom. It's a way to kind of get everyone's input on how you can make a safe space, an inclusive space for the groups, for your classes, for your sections. And a virtual Post-it board is a nice way for each person to participate in that idea sharing process. So many different ideas. One more final way that you can create collaborative spaces using technology is through online group spaces. One example that I have that we all have access to is Canvas groups, which is a feature that some of us use frequently and others of us have never used, actually. So a little introduction to Canvas groups. It's a space that you can create in Canvas, and students get access to it, or they get access to their own group. And then faculty and teaching team members also get access to people's groups. So one of the things they can do in that space is create their own discussions. So it's kind of like a little mini discussion board for the group. They have their own shared files, so they can upload resources and things there. They can create their own shared wikis in the group. And then finally, when you have a Canvas assignment, they can submit as a group, be graded as a group, and get feedback and comments as a group. So an example of how you could do this in a class is to use this as a space for final group projects. So for example, they could use the discussion space as a place where they can brainstorm and collaborate on ideas for their final project. Then they can use the shared files to share slides or share articles or documents with each other. They can use the shared wikis to collect and organize media, text, other things. And then finally, when they're ready to submit their final project, then they can submit it as a group because it's set up as a group assignment in Canvas. I think that's all I have for creating collaborative spaces for students. I think the one thing that I'd love to say as a takeaway is that all of these tools are, I think the real power has come from the creative ways that people are using the tools. So whatever tools you have access to, really what's made all of these into collaborative spaces for students is just the creative and interesting ways that people are using them. They're all actually quite simple tools when it comes down to it. So I'd love to hand it off to Annie to talk about the next lightning session.
Thanks, Gabe. I'm Annie Rota. I'm Director of Academic Technology for the FAS, and I'm in HUIT. So we've talked a bunch about sort of generalized strategies that seem like they could work across a lot of disciplines, but we know there were also some really specific challenges that that courses faced. So I'll share a few examples from courses that had to really rework or replace course assignments or activities, especially those that relied on on-campus resources, on-campus spaces, or other kinds of kind of in-person experiences like physical, tactical experiences. And this is a very big category, so it will be of just skimming the surface of a few ideas. So we can go to the next slide, Gabe. All right, so the first, maybe most obvious and visceral challenge came from the laboratory sciences, right? On campus, many of these introductory science courses, have students learning basic lab skills from instructors like the gentleman we see here with his gloves on and a pipette in his hands. And he's teaching students about the pipettes, which they will then go into the lab and use in lab assignments. So this obviously isn't something that's happening with remote instruction. But these courses were able to take advantage of online lab simulations, including tools from Labster, which is a third-party vendor, and Lab Exchange, which is a Harvard-grown set of simulations, like the one that we see here, which it's the same micropipettes and the same processes that they're learning. They're just interacting with a virtual version. So that's a very basic one, and then it wasn't just the basics though. So if you could pop to the next slide, Gabe. These simulations can get far more sophisticated. So in Life and Physical Sciences A, they assigned a Labster simulation where students use the skills that they learned earlier in the course to participate in a simulated forensic investigation. So they're actually role playing as a crime scene investigator, and they're using the skills that they developed earlier on in the course to kind of go through the whole process of collecting samples, analyzing samples, figuring out, did the DNA from the sample they collect at the virtual crime scene match the suspect, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more than just the very basics, and we've gotten some good initial feedback from these courses, although they have found challenges like students' hardware at home may not have been up to the task of running these fairly robust simulations. So they also created some recordings of those simulations just in case for those students. Another area that really relies a lot on the in-person experience is language instruction. Of course, the college has a language requirement, so a whole lot of undergraduates go through at least introductory language courses. And our language instructors have a long history of all kinds of creativity in their teaching, both with and without technology. So it's been really interesting to see how they've adapted to remote instruction. So I have a few examples from the languages from the sort of very introductory and mechanical end of things. Students in Armenian need to learn a new alphabet, an introductory Armenian, and this would typically be something they would do by hand on worksheets, just like we all did in first grade when we were learning to form our our letters. And so she would hand out worksheets. Students would have a chance to practice this in person with pen and paper. And so she tried something different. Students in her class all had access to iPads. The college did a big iPad loaner program for just this kind of reason. And so she shared her screen in Zoom with worksheets like the ones that she would have had in class. But it wasn't just students practicing on their own. They were actually writing on her shared screen. So if you've played around with the whiteboard in Zoom and with screen annotation, students could actually, trace over the letters on the screen and see each other's work and get immediate feedback. So in fact, maybe even a more, interactive and communal kind of experience than they would have had, sitting in the classroom, practicing on their own pieces of paper. So I thought that was a pretty neat one. Moving slightly up the chain of sophistication in language instruction, cultural heritage is also always a topic, especially as students move up into intermediate levels. So this is from a Spanish course where students would typically do some kind of creative project at the end of the course to create an actual physical thing, right? Sometimes it's making, they might choose to make clothing or food or something that's related to the cultural heritage they've studied in the class, which they then share with the class. Again, very much relying on kind of the physical experience. So this year he adjusted that project so that instead of just bringing their projects to present in class, students actually recorded videos of themselves with a tool that we've used in the college called VoiceThread. So students would upload their videos into VoiceThread, and then their classmates could respond and interact with them online rather than responding and interacting in the classroom. So again, there's part of this is the cultural heritage piece, part of it is the language practice. And so, more ways, whatever ways they can to practice the language production and communicating with one another. Another one. I think I have one more language one. Thank you. So Nicole Mills teaches introductory French, and I think Nicole is actually here. And she's had a project going for a few years now to build virtual reality content to give students a cultural immersion experiences when they can't get to Paris, if not all the students can travel. And this is obviously even more important now because of the immobility brought on by the pandemic. So she built on and added to a collection of VR content that showcases Parisian life. And students now, as the technology has evolved, students can now access these on their own. It used to be that they had to come in and borrow a headset from Cabot Library and it's a pretty high-end experience, and it's really moving down so that students just need a $30 headset and their own cell phones, and they can really get this full immersion experience. And she's also taken advantage of the community of former Harvard French teaching assistants in Paris to give students a chance to interact with Parisians. So last but not least is a category. It's kind of a broad category, but there's so many project-based courses in the college, and many of them have, if you've ever seen the CS50 fair, you know what I'm talking about. Many of them have a end of term showcase, right, or a fair, or a kind of a cumulative event where students, presenting their final projects. And there are several examples of courses that needed to find ways to do that and found creative online ways. And one in particular, Gen Ed 1080, Engineering the Acoustical World, worked with the Bach Center to host. They would typically host their end of term showcase in Cabot Library. Right, students come, they wander around, they can ask questions about all the different projects. And this year it was a digital showcase. They actually hosted it in gather.town, if people have played with that. It's a sort of game-like environment where students can wander around with a little avatar. But the project was students created these digital performance venues based off of real-life venues. The one shown here is a sort of cartoon version of Red Rocks. And there are other examples. Jill Lepore used a platform called Scalar that we supported to create kind of a collection of all of the final projects for the course, right, in lieu of kind of having a poster session or a presentation session. So that's just very skimming the surface of the many, many, many creative things that I hope you all will also share with one another in the breakouts. I'm going to hand it off to Ian for our last section.
Thanks, Annie. So we've been through a semester. We start by building some community at the beginning and then have some space for some collaborative work to be done and some specialized pieces in each class. And then we come to the end of the semester and there's an exam to take, and we can't gather in a room and all write in one space to fill out the paper exam that you've been given in a strict time period proctored by a lot of people. So we need to come up with some other resources to do this. But encourage you as you think about what you're going to do to consider how you might change that. Are there ways that your traditional exam might become a take-home exam? Obviously, if you assume the students have access to a lot more information, change exactly what you're assessing, whether it's not, so that it's not as much on recall, but perhaps on application. Perhaps that becomes a group project. There's other things to reconsider as you do that. We've seen all of those kinds of different sorts of assessments used in a variety of ways to great success. And that's something that can be done in your classroom in person as well as moved online. However, sometimes it's really important to get to a traditional exam, and we have some Canvas tools that we can use to control that environment a little bit more, to limit the time, the availability, and to ways that we can proctor those exams even. So we'll talk about all of that. I do want to talk first to broaden out what assessment might mean and some of the opportunities that come along with that new space of being online. So one of those opportunities is just in some low stakes assessments. So there's some ways to help people develop knowledge as they go along, practicing some skills they may need for the final exam, or doing some exercises that get them reflecting and perhaps give you some data about what they might want. Maybe that's a pre-class exercise, some couple of questions about what they have learned from the reading or questions they might have coming in, or a post-class exercise of something they want to learn or something they want to remember after the semester is over to gather those reflections, valuable for you and valuable for the students. Low stakes ways to do assessment, again, not tied to a high stakes exam. I want to highlight one of these from a faculty member at the Kennedy School, Akash Deep, who has a creative way to use some Panopto videos that he recorded as flipped classroom content and to really encourage his students to reflect more on that and to ensure that they're viewing them. So let's hear from Akash.
Panopto makes it very easy to embed some questions. So I actually would embed a few very simple concept check questions. I call them. In the beginning, I associated credit with that, but it led to more anxiety. So after about 2 or 3 weeks, I made them just sort of complete or incomplete kind of assessment. But that was pretty effective in making sure everybody did look at the lecture. I did care about their looking at that async lecture because I did not want to go over that content again in class. The other thing that I also did was I created a space right where they were watching the video for them to type questions that came to their mind. So I would take a look at those before class. So I started my lecture by saying, these were some of the questions that were raised by students while watching the async video, and I'll start by answering those and addressing some other questions. So that was a very clear signal that this was expected, and it was not very hard to for them to, I think, meet that expectation.
So we can see that there are a variety of ways to think about assessments and what they might be doing for your students, as well as giving you the information you need. I wanted to present to you some of the technical considerations when presenting an exam in Canvas. We at the Kennedy School have seen this work a couple of different ways, where people may have a detailed exam that goes question by question, and they may actually present that to the student instead of as a Canvas quiz with each individual question, as a PDF document they want them to print out and fill out, or perhaps fill out on some kind of device where they can add their answers, draw mathematical formulas and graphs that can be valuable for people to submit, and then have them uploaded to the Canvas site. So you can use your traditional exam that you've created in a virtual space in some ways. These are just a couple of ways to limit students' access to that. So in the example you see on the left-hand side here, there is an exam that's available for 48 hours. And any student that starts that exam will have 135 minutes to complete it. Now, in our case, that was a 2-hour exam, and then a 15-minute buffer was given to handle any technical difficulties where they had to scan a PDF with a phone and upload it to the right place. They built in this 15 minutes, and this faculty member was very clear with the students that that is extra time. So you shouldn't get to the end of 135 minutes and then start your upload process. And that kind of clarity was really important to the students to say, it's a 2-hour exam and you've already been given the technical time. So I do not want late submissions. And that kind of clarity is really important because students are experiencing this differently. There's no way to say to them at the end of a class period that you are done with your exam, please hand it in if it's going to be on a rolling basis. There also is a way to moderate these quizzes in Canvas. So by moderating this quiz, you can give a student an extra attempt if they do have some kind of unrecoverable technical error or extra time if they need that extra time just to submit. So those are some options. And the last thing I want to mention about exams is proctoring. So that is the last tough nut to crack when it comes to giving an online exam, when there is high stakes, when you do have a limited time, when you really want to watch the student take it. There's a couple of different ways to do that. I mentioned here 2 of them. So Proctorio is a service that's intended for just proctoring. This is not a person watching a student taking an exam, but a technology. It integrates with the Canvas quiz and can do things like record the student, their video, their audio, capture their screen, limit them from accessing other websites in the midst of their exam. This is really powerful. It's not available to everybody. Not every school has access to this. It does have a significant financial expense to it. And so if it's not available, it can be tough to implement. But Proctorio and other services like this are out there as possibilities. Another less expensive technology and requires some labor to get this done would be to do this in Zoom. So we have some classes that are being proctored by asking the student to take their camera and point it at their work surface as they're writing so that somebody could, in a Zoom session, in a breakout room where faculty or TAs can cycle through those and observe people taking their exams, is one way to access, to get that kind of proctoring experience where students know that they're accountable for the work that they're doing right along with the exam that they're taking. So that's all I have for you on final exams. And I am sure that we have all just touched on little pieces of it. And so I want to turn this over to Annie to talk about some of our topic breakouts that we'll be doing right now.
Great. Thanks, Ian. In the third half of our program, you've heard a lot or a little about a lot of things, and we know that there's a lot more that has been going on in your schools, in your classrooms, and with your faculty. And so we're really excited to hear more and have you all hear from each other about the creative and exciting solutions to remote teaching challenges that you saw or experienced this fall. So we're setting up breakout rooms for each of those sort of broad topic areas that we just ran through really fast, it feels like. And we're going to give you a specific assignment in those breakout rooms, right? Because we know that's an important best practice for breakout rooms. So in those rooms, we hope that you will share a success from the fall. And or a challenge that you're looking at for this spring, and what you're going to try to do about it, or if it's a real pickle and you're really not sure, to use the wisdom in the room with you to try to find some answers. So we hope that the colleagues that join you are ready to help you generate ideas and possibilities. Each room will have a facilitator from one of our academic technology teams, but we are all coming from different schools. And I think we've seen this pop up already in the chat a couple of times, that different tools may be available in your school than from the other folks in the room. So we know that's a reality because it's Harvard. So we hope this will help you generate ideas and inspire you to try things or think about things. But it's also really important to work with your academic technology partners and teaching and learning teams at your school to understand what will work best in your context and what your students have access to and so forth. Okay, so we're a large group, and we want to make sure that we give you plenty of time in your groups. So instead of doing a big share out at the end, we're going to ask you, I think you got a preview of this earlier, that we are going to capture your highlights from your conversations in some shared Google Docs. So I'm going to give you the link for those shared docs. All right. I'm going to drop that link in the chat. That should be open to everyone, and you should be able to open that link up, and you'll find a list of documents there, and you'll see the topics that we're going to cover. So what we're going to do now is open breakout rooms that allow you to join the room of your choice, and you should see when you see the breakout rooms button show up, you should see the option to join those rooms. If you haven't updated your Zoom in a while, just hang out here, and I'll stay in the main room and help move you to the place that you want to be. All right. I think we're good. I'm looking at my co-facilitators to make sure that we covered all the things. We gave everybody their instructions. I am going to open the rooms, and we will bring you back we'll give you about 20 minutes in those rooms. This session we do have until 1:15. So we'll give you about 20 minutes. We'll call you all back and just quickly wrap up at the very end. But I wish you great conversations, and I hope you will share those notes so that we can share them around with everybody later. And thank you. So here we go. I'm opening the rooms. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. And I hope you had fruitful conversations in your rooms. Feel free if you have some like great highlights or amazing things that you want to share in the chat. Feel free, but the main resource we hope that you have helped create for yourselves is the collected notes that you were taking in those collaborative documents. So I've posted that link again. All those notes are there. We had started a document of resources that we knew might be useful coming out of the lightning rounds. We'll also go through the chat. I know people have shared some resources and links to how-tos and things like that may be helpful. So we'll collect some of those up. I also want to just remind everybody that of the wealth of resources that have been developed at your schools and at the university since the spring, really, resources like the VPAL Teach Remotely site, and including a lot of the little video snippets that you saw were from the VPAL collection of sort of showcase videos. So there are a lot more there. Thank you, Melissa. There's a lot more there to look at. We really just scratched the surface. And I'll also remind you to talk to your local teaching and learning teams and your academic technology teams. There's been so much going on, and we're all still learning from all the things that happened this fall. Ian, Gabe, any other parting thoughts? Oh, thank you. Our parting slide.
I just wanted to say thank you for being here. And we have our emails up on the screen. And at least for me, I absolutely love hearing new ideas and challenges. I think it's what keeps me going through all of the craziness these days, is to it's just to see the ingenuity and all of the new ideas that everyone has. So I would love to hear from you if you have any thoughts that pop into your head after the session.
Yeah,
I'm sure that goes for Ian and Annie as well.
Absolutely.
It certainly does. I will say this has been a really fun presentation to put together, because it forced us to find those innovative things that were happening out there in the schools. And so I hope that you all got to, I don't know whether we got more out of the presentation than you all might have. I hope you got something close to what we got out of it. It was really a joy to do and to learn all that's happening. So thanks for coming. And
yeah, thank you all. VPAL friends, any last parting notes we should share? If you've seen other great faculty examples, I think we can still invite and encourage faculty to self-identify, or you can identify them to showcase on the VPAL site. I think that's the most powerful thing, is to hear faculty hearing from other faculty. Thank you all, and best wishes for a successful spring semester.